If you do a quick YouTube search for Xenoblade Chronicles, you'll find no shortage of people calling the game a masterpiece. Starting today, you might even see my video popping up saying the same thing. If you've never played the game, I suggest you click off now because I'm going at this with a reckless disregard for spoilers. Why? Because I love this game and I don't know how to say all I want to say while avoiding the spoilers. Now, I know what you guys are all thinking. Tarks, this intro would sound so much better if you had Video Game Donkey's voice, because the game's a masterpiece. I know, alright? We can't all be perfect, so let's just get right to it. To start this off, I feel the need to address a couple things, primarily about how I'm going to structure this video. I have no idea how to talk about a game of this magnitude, and chances are I'm just gonna suck its dick through excessive rambling while I talk at you for entirely too many minutes. The depth in this game and scope of its world is well beyond my expertise to put into words, so while I strive to articulate the details as best as I can, many things simply will not be addressed. While the idea of having a 42-minute video that is literally the answer to everything in regards to Xenoblade sounds appealing, I just don't think myself or my computer could handle such a project at this time. Due to the sheer size of the game, I can't just segue between talking points and return to them later, because the talking points are too big on their own and it would just turn into a mess. So this review will come in sections so I can talk about each section without confusing things. So, without further ado, let's start with my history with Xenoblade Chronicles, its launch and localization. Launch history. Nintendo of America had no interest in bringing Monolith Soft's monolithic masterpiece to the West, but a localization was made by Nintendo of Europe for PAL regions. Western JRPG fans on the Wii sounded off unanimously when they seen this game in action and demanded a localization, but of course Nintendo of America responded only with silence. After some time, a company named Operation Rainfall gathered funds and took the process on themselves. Operation Rainfall set out to bring 3 games to North America. Those games were Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and Pandora Tower. Operation Rainfall's announcement was the first I had heard of Xenoblade Chronicles. As somebody who generally harbors disdain for the Wii, my interest was piqued, but sadly not enough to justify buying the game at full price when it first came out. For about 3 months I seen the game on shelves at EB Games and kept saying, we'll get it when it price drops, we'll get it when it price drops, we'll get it when it price drops. What a mistake that was. After 3 months or so had passed, the game had completely disappeared from store shelves. Xenoblade was the first game Operation Rainfall localized, and their funds to do so were low. As such, EB Games and GameStop were the only place that carried it, and a very limited print was made. I spent the next year trying to get a copy and watched the value get as high as 160 Canadian dollars. At the absolute height of its value, hundreds of new copies flooded the market at once in GameStops all across the United States. GameStop had released a new print run of the game, but they didn't sell them as new because they knew the value of them used was even higher. So they broke the factory seal and put them on their shelves for 90 USD a piece. They sold out quickly. This was the exact same dirty practice GameStop done with the Metroid Prime trilogy on Wii just a few years earlier. The only way to distinguish the first Xenoblade print from the second was on the inside of the Wii case, where one print will have the Wii logo and the other a Nintendo logo, thus proving these were in fact 2 different print runs. When this happened, the price of the game went down worldwide, and that's when I got my copy. At 90 Canadian dollars, I bought the game. At the time, the rate of exchange would have put that at about 80 US dollars. However, I bought this as a Christmas gift for my fiancée that year. Having watched her play a good deal of it, I didn't play it myself until now, when the game has been reprinted as recently as 4 months ago, and the value currently sits at 40 US dollars. You know what? I'm not even mad. For a game of this quality, I would be willing to pay far more than I did. So let's jump into the basics of Xenoblade Chronicles. The basics. Xenoblade Chronicles is a pseudo-action JRPG with many MMO elements developed by Monolith Soft in 2010 for the Nintendo Wii home console. In 2011, the game was released in Europe and Australia, and in 2012 it was released in North America. In 2015, a port of the game was made for the new Nintendo 3DS and was released worldwide that April, and was the first ever new Nintendo 3DS exclusive game in North America. This is gonna be a long review, so I gotta stay hydrated. Let's get into the story. The Story, Part 1. The game opens up as two colossal titans known as the Mechonis and Bionis are engaged in mortal combat. The reason for their fight is unknown to the player at this time, and no real context is given as to who we should be rooting for. In one fell swoop, the Mechonis and Bionis both injure each other, and the two great beasts seem to freeze in place and shut down, their energy having left their body. The giants lay still for so long that eventually life and populations grow upon their bodies. Much like their names, the Mechonis life forms are ones of cold machinery, and the Bionis is all varying degrees of biological life forms. We fast forward now and zoom in close on the blade of one of these great beasts to an area known as Sword Valley and see for the first time just how epic in scale one of these creatures really are. Aboard the blade of the beast, two entire civilizations wage war. Native to the Bionis, humanoid creatures known as Homs run headlong at the Mechons, the native machine creatures of the Mechonis. It is clear here the Mechons are the aggressors, and we are introduced to three Hom characters who will fight them off. Dunban, the wielder of a great sword known as the Monado, the gunner Dixon, whom I will not refer to properly by name again in this review, and Mumkar, the claw user. Mumkar quickly crumbles under the pressure of war and attempts to run away only to meet a disastrous fate. Coxon provides cover for Dunban, and Dunban repels the enemy advance, but the power of the Monado takes a heavy toll on him. Fast forwards and we see Dunban no longer has use of his right arm. The Monado's power had taken this away from him. I'd say that this was one hell of an intro, but for all that we've seen so far, the intro hasn't stopped yet. As epic of an intro as that is, the intro doesn't end there. Typically with JRPGs, the intro doesn't stop until the main character begins his journey. And we haven't met our main character yet, so let's take a look at him. Meet Shulk. A young, bright boy with an interest in his studies, machinery, and the mysteries of the Monado, Shulk enjoys his life in the colony with his friends Ryan and Fiora. For all intents and purposes, life here is fine, although it doesn't stay that way for long. Seemingly out of nowhere, the Mechons invade the colony, and this invasion is one of the most high-tension intros I've seen in a JRPG. Ryan, Shulk, Dunban, and Fiora make their way through the colony while the whole place is coming down around them. The Mechons invade like a stalking nightmare brought through into reality, and the terror they instill is sure to put any player on edge. Victory seems hopeless. Dunban picks up the Monado once more with his good arm and charges into battle. However, his body is no longer capable of wielding it without great injury. Very few people in fact can handle the power of the Monado. Luckily for us, Shulk is something of a chosen one. Shulk picks up the Monado and charges at the Mechons and suddenly begins getting visions of how the Mechons are going to attack him and his friends. Reading these visions, Shulk is able to save himself and his friends, but only for a time. A mighty and mysterious silver-faced Mechon descends on the colony, and Shulk quickly discovers the Monado has no ability to damage the silver-faced Mechon. Shulk also discovers the hard way that visions of the future cannot always be changed, when tragically in her moment of valor, Fiora is brutally murdered by the silver-faced Mechon. Before much more happens, the Mechon retreat. Fiora is dead, the colony is destroyed, and the Mechon live on. Shulk, with nothing to his name but the newfound power of the Monado, and his friend Rhine, swears vengeance on the Mechon and leaves town to hunt them down and put a stop to them and their treachery once and for all. While main characters suffering the loss of their towns or loved ones at the beginning of a JRPG might be a bit of a trope, nothing hits this trope better and with more of a genuine feeling than Xenoblade Chronicles. What ensues next is a massive adventure across the Mechonis and Bionis, through vast open fields, frozen ice caps, ethereal marshes, densely wooded forests, cold machine factories, infested mines, overrun caves, and serene, awe-inspiring cities. Xenoblade Chronicles is a game that is hard to sum up story-wise beyond this point because there exists virtually no filler in its massive narrative. I've explained the intro so far, so from here we're going to take a break from the story and discuss how the battle works, as you're going to be doing a lot of it over this epic adventure. The battle mechanics. Combat in Xenoblade Chronicles is pretty unique to anything I've ever played. I don't think this is the first game to quite have a battle system like this, but it's definitely the first I've played. Encounters happen simply by approaching enemies in the overworld, with some enemies being passive and requiring you to engage with them first. You can only bring 3 party members into battle with you, and they cannot be exchanged over the course of an encounter. Thankfully, quality of life elements are really high in this game, as characters not brought into battle will still gain XP at a decent rate despite not participating. There is also options for the characters to gain even more XP when not participating through their skill trees. Standard physical attacks happen automatically when you're in close proximity to the targeted enemy. Initially, I was skeptical about the auto attack and thought it would be bad design and antithetical to gameplay, but that changed as soon as I started playing. Had standard physical attacks not been automatic, the game would be a nearly unplayable barrage on the senses and just far too difficult to keep up with. As your characters automatically attack, you select to perform special attack skills from this menu down here. These skills work like MMO skills and all have cooldowns, but the cooldowns are fast enough that you will be using all of your skills frequently. Most skills provide different effects, buffs, or debuffs, with some requiring you to be in specific placements to the enemies. To best explain to you how this works, I'm going to give you a couple examples using Shulk as our playable character. Generally, when you start a battle, Shulk will strike the enemy first, if it is in fact Shulk you are using. When this happens, you'll see a red ring appear around him. This indicates that an enemy is aggroed to Shulk. You can use a skill called Backslash to deal a heavy blow to the enemy, but using it front on is not using it to the best of its ability. You'll want to get behind the enemy before casting this art, but so long as that enemy is aggro to you, it will not turn its back on you. This is where you'll want to use Shadow Eye. Shadow Eye reduces the enemy's aggro to you and boosts damage dealt by physical arts. Once the enemy is no longer aggro to you, simply move around to their back and cast Backslash for critical damage. This is one of the smallest and easiest combo chains you can do. Next, I want to show you a combo chain using Shulk and Rein so you can understand how important teamwork will be in battle. This time when a battle starts, the goal is to topple the enemy. Toppling the enemy first requires you to break the enemy. Shulk can't topple the enemy on his own, as for the bulk of the game he only has skills to break the enemies. Rein, similarly, only has skills to topple. This gauge in the top left-hand corner is your party gauge. When the party gauge is full, you can scroll to this icon in the middle art slot and select to perform a chain attack. If Shulk goes first, you can select his art to break, followed by Rein and his art to topple. Limiting how far in a combo chain one character can get on their own reinforces the need to play as a party and to grow as a party, and heavily encourages players to try different party builds to be most effective in battle. Both of the chains I just showed are very small overall, but I think do great in showing how to work the battle system. But things get even deeper than this. Shulk is the only one that can damage Mechons with his base attacks. This is due to the power of the Monado. So if you find regular battle is ever getting boring, don't worry. Some Mechons are right around the corner to mix things up. When in a battle against Mechons, you must topple the Mechons, brute force them with Shulk, not recommended, or enchant your party members' weapons with the power of the Monado to be effective. In order to enchant your party's weapons, you must first fill the talent gauge, allowing you to use arts that are specific to the Monado. This is done through regular physical attacks. The talent gauge can take a bit to fill, so you always start battles against Mechon at a disadvantage. Enchant isn't the only skill the Monado has though. Through the power of the Monado, Shulk can see visions of the future. These visions show enemy attacks that will kill or debilitate your party members. Based on the enemy attack, you will need to act accordingly. Some attacks will be ether or physical attacks that require the party members to guard. Others will be arts that will require Shulk to use the Monado's shield ability. Later on, you will come across enemies that can read your moves just like you can read theirs, which will require the use of different abilities, and of course, the Monado has even more abilities beyond that. But in the pursuit of brevity, something we've long gone past, we're going to move on. Every time you gain a level, you earn points used to level your skills individually. You start with the ability to level skills up to level 4. Levels 5 and 8 are unlocked only after buying the books to learn about them, with levels 9 to 12 being locked behind yet another book generally gathered by defeating large enemies. And that's another thing. Throughout this game, you won't just be battling regular scrub enemies and bosses. Everywhere you go, there are special named enemies. These named enemies are much stronger than the regular guys and have many more abilities. Some named enemies are tied to side quests, but most are just there to fuck up your day. These can almost always be bypassed if desired, but they offer an awesome challenge if you're looking for one. If at any point you feel battle is getting stale, you're not bound to playing as only Shulk. In fact, most seasoned Xenoblade players prefer to use him as little as possible, so feel free to experiment. Experiment early as well, because one other detail about the Monado is that it cannot cut human flesh. There will come a point where you have to fight humans, and it would serve you well to know how to play as somebody else before this happens. Just as a side note, there is a full armor and equip system. Shulk, of course, is bound to the Monado and will not get many weapons throughout the game, but everybody else will get an overabundance of them. Most good armor and weapons will have slots for gems to be equipped. Gems grant special abilities. Gems can be crafted in this refinery here, and yes, even gem crafting has an immense amount of depth. Crafting takes 2 party members and a bunch of materials. Depending on the party members you use, their affinity, and the materials you threw into the refinery, the gem you get out of it will be different. Avoid another mistake I made, and craft as often as possible. Don't wait and have to craft for 2 hours all at once like I did. Yes, it's a neat system, but not neat enough that you want to spend 2 straight hours focusing on it. Now, I think you heard enough about battle. There is so much more that could be said, but I think I'm rambling and it's probably turning into a mess, as I'm worried much of this review is. So let's talk about the world, the characters, and the side quests. World, characters, and side quests. As you progress, the story unfolds at a breakneck pace, never sticking you to one single train of thought for very long. Such a thing could wreak havoc on the mind through information overload. However, with the use of such massive open areas, it really feels like your peaceful treks through the land gives you a sort of mind space to just let it all sink in. Although the narrative is always unfolding at 100% intensity, the actual act of exploration gives you a real sense of comfort. Each area of the game has a unique and memorable design, and the best I can do to explain to you the scope, beauty, and variety of them is to show you on the screen. No area overstays its welcome, and if you ever feel like the palette for the zone is maybe getting predictable, then just wait until night. Oftentimes when the game enters its night cycle, the entire aesthetic of the area changes. One of the first places I noticed this in, and struck me with awe, was Satoral Marsh. During the day, this is a dingy, dimly lit gray and drab area, but when night comes around, it seems a bioluminescent glow sweeps the area, turning it into this beautiful and serene, awe-inspiring landscape that just captivated my imagination and dragged me out of whatever slump the daytime aesthetic had shifted me into. Oftentimes, with the change in the day-night cycle comes a change in the music as well, as most zones have 2 themes, one being dedicated to the day and the other to the night. Certain enemies also are tied to the day-night cycle, and some quests are only able to be collected or completed during certain times. And speaking of side quests, this wouldn't be a pseudo-action JRPG with MMO elements if it didn't have a metric fuckton of them. Side quests can be picked up just about anywhere, but most of them will be gathered in towns by talking to different citizens. Side quests come in many different forms, but the vast majority are simple fetch quests or hunts that require you to kill a specific amount of certain enemies to complete. These side quests are of course nothing interesting, but should be picked up. Most of them you will complete naturally over the course of your adventure and will grant you XP as part of the reward. The best part is, you don't even have to return to the person who gave you the quest to get your rewards. Once you finish the quest, it's done. You're rewarded and you keep going. Another small quality of life thing Xenoblade gets right that so many other games just gets wrong. These quests typically require 0 extra effort from the player and you still get rewarded. Feels good, man. Other quests have a fair amount more depth to them. some of them strikingly so. An early example of these kinds of quests includes a woman who lost her watch. First you must find it, then repair it. Repairing the watch means gathering parts, then you hand deliver it. Sure, it's not the most exciting side quest in the world, but this one is sourced from the intro of the game. Others later on help to build the ongoing subplots of some of the towns, and even lead to some pretty cool boss battles before the end. If you focus on any side quests in the game, focus on the multifaceted ones like these, as they add so much richness to the already Which world? If you focus on any side quests in the game, focus on the multifaceted ones like these, as they add so much richness to the already rich world around you. But of course, nobody adds more richness to the world than your future party members. Along the way, Shulk meets new characters, each with their own massive history, families, and incredible personalities. In some ways, they may seem like they have archetypes, but their archetypes are so thin it would be an insult to refer to them as such. Ryan isn't just a dumb best friend, Samwise Gamgee kind of character. Ricky isn't just some kind of Jar Jar Binks clone, though with his mannerisms I wouldn't blame anybody for feeling this way. These characters may tick those boxes in one way or another, but those are one of 1,000 boxes they might tick. The first new character Ryan and Shulk meet is Sharla. Sharla lives in a refugee camp with her brother Juju, and away from her lover Gadeau. The first thing I noticed here is the camp itself. This camp isn't the generic setup of tents and some fortification we see in literally every other RPG. Sharla and her brother Juju had to flee the colony they lived in when the Mechon attacked. They fled with some company and took shelter in the hollow of a mountain. The small cave they live in now truly feels like it's being lived in by those who are desperate to cling to life and to keep the rain off the fires that they need to cook with. When I seen this area, I realized for the first time just how logical and real this whole world was being built. In every corner of every room, you can feel the entire history of the characters who inhabit them. The entire world tells a story, and oftentimes the story being told by the environment spans centuries. Through just a couple of conversations with Sharla, and after seeing where she lives, I instantly felt an attachment to her, and I immediately became engaged in her storyline. Every time you meet a new character, you get a sense for who they are, their plights, and their interests, and each time you meet a new character, pursuing their goals becomes just as important as pursuing your own. It's because of this that explaining the story becomes so hard, because the story alone becomes 70 hours of incredibly personal and important plot to the player, even when the stories you're unfolding are more important to the new characters than they are to Shulk's end goal. Sharla in many ways reminds me of one of my favorite female characters in anime. She reminds me of Misato from Evangelion, but in a way that's entirely her own. Like Misato, Sharla is a woman who wants to love and enjoy life and be able to have fun, but life has thrust her into a position of seemingly insurmountable responsibility. Sharla is a serious and powerful woman who still seeks to get the best out of life and to provide the best she can for others. Ricky, the aforementioned Jar Jar Binks character, comes off as a clumsy loser at first, but as he develops you realize that his mannerisms betray his true intentions, that he is a warrior with a heart of gold and only sometimes has delusions of grandeur. Ryan is more than the goofy best friend. In many ways, he's like an older brother to Shulk, struggling with the idea that Shulk no longer needs his protection and that maybe they both need each other. Melia is more than a cold princess. She is a woman in love and rejected, but also beholden to high-class responsibilities she may be inadequately prepared for. There are no characters who are one-dimensional, and at no point should there ever be an excuse to feel like there are. Each character is woven straight into the very fabric and history of the world, and their effect can be felt anywhere they go. Around the launch of this game, I also heard some people complain about the voiceovers, and I have to say, if it's your opinion that the voiceovers aren't very good or that you just don't like them, well, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. The voiceovers are fantastic. I mentioned the word affinity once earlier and didn't really explain what it was then, so if it didn't make sense I apologize, but I'm ready now to explain how this works. Each of your main characters has an affinity rank. This represents how well your characters get along with each other, how well they know each other, and most importantly, how well you, the player, know them. Chances to raise affinity come in many places. In the overworld, you can gain affinity simply by talking to people and taking side quests. You can also gain affinity in battle by encouraging those you fight beside. The higher up you go in affinity, the more bonuses you have when battling with those characters or when performing certain tasks such as gem crafting with them. In addition to affinity points, you also earn affinity coins over the course of battle. Affinity coins are used to hand select bonus skills that will be enabled with party members whom you are battling with. The bonus skills you can choose from are based on what skills you passively invested in on this chart here and how high your affinity level with your partners are. I've honestly read so much at this point that I'm starting to get dizzy. I'm not sure if what I'm even reading is making sense anymore, so forgive me if it's not. This is a lot to convey. Affinity can be used on more than your partners too. You can raise affinity with certain NPCs, which will unlock benefits for buying, selling, and trading with them. I would say the most important thing affinity gives you, yes, even more important than the stat boosting benefits, is your heart-to-heart events. Heart-to-heart events can be found all over the world, usually in pretty picturesque areas. These events are bonus conversations that are held between two characters specifically. If your affinity isn't high enough between the two characters, the characters do not know enough about each other to have the conversation, and the heart-to-heart cannot be unlocked. When your affinity is high enough, these heart-to-hearts are some of the most illuminating moments you'll experience for sub-character development. I say sub-character development because the character development is already woven into the main plot, but even more can be unfolded here. In no area does Xenoblade lack depth, but I was more than surprised that in categories they already go above and beyond in, such as character development, they managed to go even further as completely optional content. Most heart-to-hearts you won't be able to do when first finding, but I recommend revisiting the areas when you can to properly complete them. They are worth the time to see, and they boost your affinity even further. The dialogue truly shapes the characters, but there are some moments where the dialogue could come off as a bit stilted if it weren't for the impeccably chosen music. And with that, I want to move into talking about the music and art design of Xenoblade Chronicles. Music and art design. First off, the music in this game is world class. There is no doubt in my mind this is one of the greatest JRPG soundtracks of all time, and why wouldn't it be with the list of composers they had working on it? The geniuses we have to thank are Tomori Kudo, Hiroyo Yamanaka, Kenji Hiramatsu, Yoko Shimomura, and none other than Yasunori Mitsuda, who gave us the amazing music from Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, and Xenogears, among many other games. But it's not just the wondrously crafted OST that's worthy of note, but how and where it was used. About 1/4 of the way into the game, the party is confronted by Metalface, and Metalface says something to them that I feel is pretty generic bad guy dialogue, his line being, "How does it feel to be a pathetic hero?" This line in my mind is incredibly ordinary, but the music chosen to go with it changes the entire tone I ingested it with. In most situations, a line like this would be paired with more action-oriented music and just passed off as generic bad guy dialogue, but this time around it's paired with a more emotional score and accentuates the feeling the main character internalizes such a statement with.
Tell me, how does it feel to be such a pathetic hero?
You okay, Dunban?
Oh, does it hurt? I bet it does. It hurts because the Monado won't work for a bunch of losers like you!
And that accentuation with the music really resonated with me. The music is constantly playing on the character development, environmental ambience, or narrative build. It's never just slapped in to fill a hole. So much in this game is built around principles of expressing emotion, and this is true as well in the art design. One look at these characters may strike you poorly, as their massive eyes can come off as a bit unsettling, but like most things in the game, this was necessary due to hardware limitations. The Wii is of course not very capable of very high definition games, and so certain features have to be exaggerated or otherwise changed to convey all that is necessary. The large eyes are an inspiration taken right out of manga, where they become a focal point of the face and much easier to convey emotion with. Everything in the game has been affected to match system hardware limitations and disguise what would otherwise be graphical faults. It's no secret that the anti-aliasing in the game is bad, or that the poly count is really low. But the sheer scale of most things easily buries this fact and becomes a defining characteristic of the game's art style. This art style sadly ends at this game, and later entries opt for more refined, less characteristic art styles, but this one is sure to stand the test of time for how it worked around its limitations. Not everything in this game could build around these hardware limitations though. Sadly, toward the end, some battles really struggle in their frame rate, and any battle that has you fighting 5 or more enemies at once drops as low as 10 frames per second. I fault this as more of a problem with the system than the game, but it is an unfortunate black mark on an otherwise basically perfect game. These frame drops will have you dropping controller inputs drastically, and it can be frustrating. And unfortunately, Xenoblade Chronicles does not seem to be immune to what I deem as an issue in most JRPGs. The end dungeons only serve to push the end of the game further and further back, with overly high encounter rates, cheap tricks, and difficulty spikes, making what should take 5 hours take 9 or 10 instead. Some will view this simply as more content. For me, it was a tad annoying. But while we're here talking about the end game dungeons, let's talk about some of the late game story. The Story Part 2. As I said earlier, Shulk begins his journey as one of revenge, but my god does this change as the characters grow and the story of the world unfolds. The giant battle between the Mechonis and the Bionis gets better explained, and it becomes questionable if you're even doing the right thing fighting the Mechon. How do I explain over the run of a review that Xenoblade's story shifts from being about getting revenge on some robots to being about challenging God so that humanity can keep its agency and free will? Without a ton more context, what I just told you won't make any sense, but I want to linger on this a bit to share some things I thought were notable and why I think everything in this game plays into the narrative in a way that I believe far surpasses most efforts I've seen in gaming. Without giving away too much, I just want to look at the design of these two characters right here. These are the spirits of the Mechonis and the Bionis, the characters that controlled the massive behemoths that were engaging in Mortal Kombat centuries ago. I won't tell you which one is the spirit of which, but it's not like it really matters, especially without all the context in between the beginning and the end of the game. The one on the right clearly has a godlike design with the white flowing hair and large build, while the other, with many protruding pieces of armor resembling horns, has a design very akin to a demon or the devil, or more specifically Lucifer, the bringer of light, whose descent into hell was brought about after his failure to overthrow God. Whether this illusion was intentional or not, I immediately took this as visual storytelling, but there's a subtle genius intertwined with this in the narrative that I'll touch back on shortly. To quote a famous philosopher, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Friedrich Nietzsche. It may be hard to believe with the story rundown I gave you, but there comes a point where this quote becomes very relevant. There comes a point where it feels like the philosopher quoted is on a quest in this game to kill God so that mankind can thrive on its own. But which one of these characters is really God? And which one is really the devil? Is God really the good guy here, or is the devil so bad? Is Shulk the philosopher? Perhaps the role of the philosopher belongs to one of the spirits, one of these hulking giants. Perhaps the philosopher is God or the devil themselves. The story will mess with these roles several times before it's all perfectly clear, and the design of these characters is a marvelous way to keep subverting the player's expectations, and just another area I have to give Xenoblade immense amounts of credit for. Xenoblade is constantly subverting the player's expectations. I personally have a rule when it comes to video games and movies that unless a character is actually shown to die, there is a high probability that they will return no matter how much the game or movie tries to tell you they were killed. Yes, Xenoblade even subverted my expectations on that front, but not necessarily with the obvious characters you might suspect. Xenoblade, beyond its narrative as a quest for revenge, ultimately becomes a battle against a god's wish to take agency away from the humans they created. But crazy enough, it doesn't even stop there. Massive plot points are revealed in the closing cinematics, in the last 20 minutes of the game, that change literally everything about how the game is perceived and add so many more layers of depth to everything you experienced up until then. From explanations as to how this god came to exist, to how the world you exist in was created, and so on and so forth, the last 20 minutes of this game add so many more layers of depth to everything that came before it. It really just blows the mind. I believe fans of Xenogears will get more out of what's revealed at the end than people who haven't played the game, but to begin to explain everything here intricately enough that you'll understand would take so many hours. You'd be better off playing the game yourself or watching a full stream of it. As I said earlier, doing this game justice is beyond my expertise, and it's probably in my best interest to stop trying at this point. Xenoblade is a full package, and then several more full packages on top of that, and I cannot express this in enough words. From its world, to its story, to its music, to its art design, to its characters, and everything in between, Xenoblade goes above and beyond, and in my book is more than earning of the title of being a masterpiece. So I would like to end this here with my highest recommendations. Even if you're somebody like me who just does not like the Nintendo Wii, play the fucking game. Or maybe get it on 3DS, just play the damn game, okay? So without further ado...
But Tarks, you didn't even talk about the Collectopedia, the Hyantia, the Telethia...
Thanks for watching.
Let's not lose our heads, though.
Friedrich Nietzsche. As character development, they managed to go even further as completely optional content. Most heart-to-hearts you won't be able to do when first finding, but I recommend revisiting